In the heart of medieval London, on a warm August morning in 1305, thousands gathered not for trade worship or celebration, but to witness a man die. His name was William Wallace. To some, he was a rebel. To others, a hero. But on that day, he was something far more dangerous, a symbol. A man who had dared to defy an empire to rise from obscurity and unite a fractured Scotland against the overwhelming might of England. What unfolded wasn't just an execution, it was a ritual of humiliation, pain, and destruction designed not merely to end a life, but to erase an idea. Ordered by King Edward I, Wallace's death would become one of the most infamous in history, a public spectacle of hanging, drawing, and quartering that pushed the limits of human cruelty. The intention was clear: crush the rebellion by crushing its face. And yet something unexpected happened. Instead of silencing Scotland, Wallace's brutal end ignited a deeper resistance. His suffering planted seeds of freedom that would grow long after his body was torn apart and scattered across the land he fought to free. This is not the sanitized legend of movies or patriotic ballads. This is the unflinching truth, the story of how one man's death, engineered to terrify, became a timeless cry for liberty. It is a journey through betrayal, horror, and sacrifice. A narrative not of how William Wallace died, but why he still lives. The year was 1305. London's streets buzzed with the usual sounds, vendors shouting over one another to sell their goods, the clatter of horses' hooves striking cobblestone, the mix of smoke, sweat, and sewage hanging heavy in the summer air. But on one particular morning in August, something far more chilling stirred the capital, the roar of a crowd not gathered for trade, but for blood. They had come to witness a spectacle, a performance crafted to terrify. At the center of this brutal drama was a man named William Wallace, a Scottish knight, a rebel, a symbol of defiance. To the English crown, Wallace wasn't just an enemy, he was a challenge to everything they stood for. His execution was not meant to simply end his life. It was designed to obliterate his legacy, to turn a living legend into a public warning. What took place that day wasn't a clean, noble end as popular culture might suggest. No quick beheading, no solemn final words, no glory. What unfolded was a calculated ritual of cruelty, an execution engineered by King Edward I, known as Longshanks, to send a message that would echo through generations, defy England, and suffer beyond imagination. Wallace was sentenced to a punishment so infamous it became synonymous with medieval horror, hanging, drawing, and quartering. This wasn't just about death. It was about erasing a man, breaking him piece by piece, physically, emotionally, spiritually. A punishment for traitors, yes. But more than that, a theatrical display of dominance made public so the fear would take root deep in the hearts of anyone else who dared dream of freedom. But before you can understand the nightmare that unfolded on the scaffold, you need to know why Wallace was there. Scotland in the late 13th and early 14th centuries was a fractured land. Loyalties shifted like tides. Kings rose and fell. The concept of a united nation was still forming. And into this chaos came Edward I, who saw an opportunity Scotland could be subdued and absorbed under English rule. To him, the Scottish were not a sovereign people, but stubborn rebels needing correction. Wallace didn't start as a great noble or a man with a claim to power. He was a minor landowner, a commoner, with uncommon resolve. After losing his family to English aggression, he became a man on fire, driven by grief, fueled by rage, and determined to see Scotland free. His most famous moment came in 1297 at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where his forces dealt a shocking defeat to the English. That victory didn't just prove Scotland could win, it proved the English weren't invincible. But Edward I wasn't a king who allowed dissent to go unpunished. He was the same ruler who had crushed Welsh resistance and expelled the Jews from England. He understood that rebellion was contagious. If Wallace's success wasn't just reversed but thoroughly humiliated, it could stop the fire from spreading. His death needed to be more than an end, it needed to be a warning. By 1305, Wallace was one of the last figures still resisting English control. Many Scottish nobles had already bent the knee trading independence for survival. Wallace's refusal to submit made him not only a threat to England, but an embarrassment to the Scottish elite. His capture became a political necessity. The hunt for him stretched across years. Edward's government placed a bounty on his head and built a network of spies and collaborators across Scotland. As the years passed, Wallace's world grew smaller. Friends became informants. Allies turned their backs. Survival demanded compromise, and Wallace refused to make one. In the end, it wasn't a battle that brought him down, it was betrayal. In August of 1305, he was captured near Glasgow, likely betrayed by Sir John Menteith, a fellow Scot who had sided with the English. The exact details are murky, debated by historians, but the outcome was certain: Wallace was in English chains. His captors paraded him south like a trophy. What should have been a prisoner transport became a cruel tour. In every village they passed through, crowds gathered to gawk at the infamous rebel. Guards shouted insults. Children threw stones. Every mile was designed to chip away at the man turning the warrior into a sideshow. By the time he reached London, Wallace had already endured weeks of humiliation, but it was only just beginning. On August 23, 1305, Wallace stood trial at Westminster Hall. The setting was grand. The verdict was already written. The charges: treason, murder, sacrilege, arson. Crimes not just against the English king, but against the very idea of order. The trial was held in Latin, a language Wallace likely didn't understand. But it didn't matter. This wasn't justice. It was theater. When asked to respond, Wallace reportedly said he couldn't be guilty of treason against a king he had never acknowledged. That defiance sealed his fate, though truthfully it had never been in question. The sentence was the most brutal available. He would be dragged through the streets, hanged by the neck, but not to death, disemboweled while still alive, then beheaded, then quartered, each step symbolic. Each step meant to break not just the body, but the meaning of rebellion itself. And so on that warm August morning, the stage was set. London buzzed not with fear, but with excitement. Vendors sold pies and ale. Children were lifted onto shoulders. It was a day of celebration, one carefully orchestrated by the crown. The message was clear: this is what happens when you defy the throne. Wallace was stripped and tied to a hurdle, a rough wooden board. Horses dragged him from the Tower of London through the city's busiest districts. The route wasn't random. It was chosen to guarantee the largest audience. The cobblestones tore his skin. The crowd laughed, jeered, threw refuse. People didn't just watch, they participated. This was cruelty as spectacle. And Wallace. He said nothing. He didn't cry out, didn't beg. His eyes locked somewhere far beyond the crowd, beyond the moment. You could almost believe he already knew what came next. You arrive at Smithfield, London's traditional place of execution. The air is thick with noise, vendors shouting prices for meat pies and ale, children laughing, and the low, eager hum of a crowd ready to be entertained. They've come from all corners of England to see the death of William Wallace, the Scottish rebel who defied the might of the English crown. You've already been dragged through the city, tied to a wooden hurdle, your body scraped and bloodied from the cobbled streets. Every street you passed was a gauntlet of jeers and thrown filth. But this is the grand finale. The scaffold at Smithfield stands tall, visible from every angle, erected just for you. A symbol of English power designed to turn your death into a lesson. The executioner stands waiting, experienced, precise, indifferent. He's done this before, many times, but today is different. Today he plays a part in a royal message. Every cut, every action must resonate with fear. The crowd quiets as the performance begins. First they string you up by the neck, but not to kill you, at least not yet. The rope tightens. You gasp, your feet dangle, blood rushes to your head. Your throat clenches. Every nerve lights up in panic. Your vision dims as your lungs scream for air. But just as your body begins to shut down, they cut you down. You drop to the ground, barely conscious. But the worst is still to come. Next comes the disembowelment. It's hard to describe this part, hard even to imagine it. The executioner steps forward, blade in hand, and with the crowd pressed close and eager, he opens you up. Your abdomen is sliced. Heat and agony explode inside you as he begins to pull your intestines out. Slowly, carefully. This isn't about efficiency. It's about pain. He doesn't do it in silence. No, he shows the crowd. Holds up each organ like a grotesque trophy, as if proving a point to the people watching. This is what happens to traitors. There's a fire nearby already crackling. Your organs are tossed into the flames one by one. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, a new layer of horror for the audience who recoil and lean in all at once. In medieval belief, the bowels were where emotion and spirit resided. By burning them and doing it in front of your eyes, they aren't just destroying your body, they're trying to erase your humanity. But somehow you're still alive. Barely. Eyes open, chest rising and falling. Some say you whispered something, others say you stayed silent. But what's certain is this: you did not scream, not once. The executioner proceeds to the final act. He takes his axe and severs your head with a clean stroke. Finally, your suffering ends. But the humiliation continues. Your head is held high for the crowd. Blood drips from the neck. Shouts erupt, some cheers, some gasps, some laughter. It's not just your death on display. It's your defeat. Your head is dipped in tar, preserved for long-term display, and later mounted on a spike above London Bridge. It stays there for years, a grisly landmark to all who enter the city. Your body is then butchered, literally. The executioner quarters you, slicing your limbs from your torso. Each part of you becomes its own warning. One is sent to Stirling, another to Berwick, a third to Perth, and the fourth to Newcastle. Cities of Scotland, cities that once cheered your victories. Now they hang your flesh as a cautionary tale. Your destruction is complete. Not just a man executed, but scattered, dismembered, publicized. You've become a message. To the English, the performance is a success. The crowd disperses, vendors pack up, and the story of your death begins to spread. For many, it seems like the rebellion has died with you. Supporters flee. Nobles who once whispered resistance now swear loyalty. The English crown believes it has won. But they've misjudged you, and misjudged Scotland. Because even in death, you aren't forgotten. Word of your execution reaches the north. Not just the facts, but the way you died. The horror of it. The unfairness. The silence you held through it all. It spreads like fire, and instead of smothering rebellion, it fuels it. In the shadows, another man watches, Robert the Bruce. He sees in your execution not just brutality, but truth. The truth about what it means to live under English rule. He's been hesitant, caught between diplomacy and defiance. But after your death, something changes. He sees the future more clearly. Not long after, he declares himself King of Scotland. A bold move, a dangerous one. But he does it with your memory behind him. Your execution also shapes the battlefield. Future Scottish fighters know what capture means. No more mercy, no more negotiations. Surrender is not an option. They fight harder, dirtier, smarter. They avoid capture at all costs. Your fate becomes a guide, what to expect and what to avoid. A new culture emerges among the rebels, no quarter given, no quarter asked. The price of freedom they now understand is everything. And if they must die, they'll die in battle, not on a scaffold. Even beyond Scotland, your death echoes. Kings across Europe hear the tale told and retold in royal courts and peasant taverns alike. The English, once admired for their legal order, now carry a new reputation: ruthless, merciless, terrifying. Edward I thinks he has proven his strength, but instead he's revealed his cruelty. Your execution becomes a symbol, not of justice but of tyranny. And as the years pass, your story grows. Chroniclers begin to write it down. English monks in the Lanercost Chronicle record your death with disturbing precision. They describe the crowd, the time, the duration of your suffering. They see it as justice, but their detail betrays something deeper, the knowledge that this moment matters. Scottish writers offer a different version. In their pages, you're no longer just a rebel. You're a martyr, a man who never bowed, a man who endured the worst England could inflict and died with dignity. They say you never begged, that you never flinched, that your silence in the face of such agony became your final act of defiance, and that silence, it's louder than any cry. Years pass, and the details of your execution, grisly and unforgettable, are etched into the collective memory of a nation. The screams you never gave, the pain you endured, the fire that consumed your insides, all of it becomes something more than just a story of suffering. It becomes a legacy. In Scotland, your name is whispered with reverence. You're not just William Wallace anymore. You're a symbol, a martyr, a flame that refused to go out even when smothered under England's boot. Children grow up hearing your tale. Warriors carry your memory into battle. Songs are written, ballads are sung. And though your body was torn apart, your spirit has fused into the bones of the land you fought for. Robert the Bruce, inspired by your sacrifice, carries the torch forward. He learns from your life and your death. He understands that rebellion alone isn't enough. You need structure, strategy, unity. Your brutal end shows him what he's truly up against and what he must be willing to risk. In 1314, just 9 years after your execution, Scotland deals a crushing blow to the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. It's a turning point, one that would have never happened without you, without the fire you lit, without the blood you spilled. Your execution didn't kill the cause, it sharpened it. But your influence stretches far beyond the battlefield. In time, scholars, philosophers, and legal minds begin to question what happened to you, not just as a man, but as a symbol of what justice should never become. Medieval Europe starts to wake up to the idea that power must have limits, that punishment should not descend into barbarism, that even enemies deserve dignity. Your death becomes a case study in the cruelty of unchecked authority. Centuries later, when thinkers begin crafting what would become international law rules to protect the rights of prisoners, rebels, even traitors, they look back at moments like yours. Moments when justice was used as a weapon. Moments when execution became performance. They see your suffering and they vow never again, not like this. In a way, you didn't just help shape Scottish independence. You helped shape the very idea of human rights. Culture, too, refuses to let you die. Your story is told and retold, in medieval ballads passed by traveling bards, in history books and whispered prayers, eventually in plays and films. Each version adds something, some take liberties, some romanticize, some sanitize the horror. But the core never changes. You stood your ground, you suffered in silence, and you became something greater than yourself. The most famous of these retellings comes centuries later, a film, one that reaches millions. It glosses over the truth, replacing the agony of disembowelment with a single scream of freedom before a clean beheading. It's not accurate, but it captures something real, the spirit behind your final breath. In that moment, you become every man who ever stood up to tyranny, every woman who ever refused to bow, every people who ever fought for freedom against impossible odds. But beyond the stories and songs and films, your death did something few deaths can. It revealed something dark and unsettling about humanity itself. The crowd that came to watch your suffering wasn't full of monsters. They were bakers, butchers, farmers, mothers holding children, people like you, people like us. And yet they laughed, they cheered, they bought drinks and meat pies while you were torn apart before them. Why? Because they had been taught to see you not as a man, but as a message, a traitor, a spectacle. The state gave them permission, no encouragement to celebrate your destruction. And that's the terrifying truth. Cruelty doesn't need monsters. It only needs an audience and permission. You remind us how quickly civilization can become savagery when power is unchecked and suffering becomes entertainment. Yet even in that darkness you gave something bright. You showed that dignity can endure even when the body cannot. That silence in the face of horror can be louder than screams, that there is power in principle even when it leads to the scaffold. Edward IV, the king who ordered your death, thought he was ending a threat. He was ending a man. But in doing so, he created a legend, a story that outlived him, a spirit that would survive his dynasty. You became a thread in the fabric of Scottish identity, tied not to a throne, not to a bloodline, but to an idea. The idea that some things are worth any price. Your quartered body was meant to break the nation. Instead, it stitched it together. Your dismembered limbs became banners under which others would march. Your burned entrails became fuel for rebellion. Your head on London Bridge became a crown for the cause you served. You died as a warning. But you live as a reminder. That liberty isn't given, it's earned. That dignity doesn't come from titles, it comes from choices. That freedom isn't free, it is and always has been bought with blood. And that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is to suffer in silence and never ever look away. The story of William Wallace doesn't end with death. It begins there. Because when the scaffold is gone, when the crowd has dispersed, when the smoke has cleared and the flesh has rotted, what remains is not the body. What remains is the belief that freedom matters, that dignity matters, and that one voice, even silenced, can echo for centuries, and yours still does.